We were just talking earlier about some of what's been happening in Syria, and it particularly reminded me of a friend of mine had recently been to the Zaatari refugee camp, if some of you have heard of it. It's a refugee camp that sort of had emerged in the last couple of years following the situation in Syria, as a lot of you have been following. And it's currently the second largest city in Jordan after Amman. I can't remember the population, but I think it's about 200,000 if I recall, 110,000. And so my friend was telling me about what happened at the refugee camp. And she'd been writing about the situation there and documenting it and taking pictures and other things. And I'm not able to sort of describe just really how bad it is. And I think a lot of us would struggle to understand what it means to be, tonight you're sitting in your nice warm home and the day after, all you can do is pick up, a small duffel bag and head across the border to the next country, that be it Jordan or, or Lebanon or Turkey, and that's all you carry with you. And one of the stories she told me was the story of one of the problems in the refugee camps is what they call WASH. WASH stands for, it's a sort of a department as part of the UN that looks after water, sanitation, and hygiene. So these are the guys that set up these wash stations, which basically are water holes, right? So you can take water and take it to the family, and they have communal toilets and so forth. And what one gentleman had done is that in the middle of the night, he'd gone, and these are like really the scarcest resources, right? You can imagine in the middle of the desert, and it's a tent city, and you have only a few places where you can go to the toilet and have a shower and get water. And he basically took a hammer and he broke one of these wash stations, which served a lot of people. And for most of us that sounds incredibly horrible. He did not consider the conditions of all the people around him. It turned out the reason he did it was quite deep for him. And essentially what he wanted to do, when he took the bricks, he went next to his tent and he built this little sort of yard where his wife could sort of probably hang the clothing and so forth. And I sort of linked it to the sort of Syrian culture and Syrian houses, which are quite grandiose and have a nice courtyard and so forth. And that's what he did. For him, it was a way of regaining his dignity, right? For a lot of us, it's very difficult to understand. Why would you break the place where people get water? But to him, that's what he was trying to regain. And the reason I tell you that story is because people lose a lot when they end up in these situations, right? The situation is horrible as it is, and people try to do whatever they can to rebuild their lives. And that's why I'm really glad that we have this discussion today, because I spend a lot of time working in education, and I've been talking to friends about how are these kids getting education? Are they going to schools? I'm trying to set up schools in the refugee camps, and it's very politically complicated. As a matter of fact, I connected them to them all to get some advice. But there are lots of other things that people lose as they do that. You not only lose your family, but you've lost your entire life. And just, if you close your eyes for a second and imagine suddenly tomorrow, you literally had to, pick up a bag and, get on the boat to Calais. You don't speak the language, at least in this case, a lot of them do, but in Turkey they don't. And just imagine what their life would be like. You have nothing. Whatever you did have at home, you just suddenly don't have. And I'm really glad, because Bidna Capoeira, which Bidna, the Arabic part means we want. We would like some capoeira. That's the kind of work they do. So they use play and capoeira as a dance and sort of a form of, and as a martial art, to give kids a lot of the stuff they lost. And I don't want to talk too much about that, because that's where Omar will cover, inshallah. So, to have that conversation, we have with us Omar Chowdhury. Thanks for joining us. Who is the co-founder and executive director of Bidna Capoeira. It's an international charity using unique Brazilian art form of capoeira. Some of you possibly have seen what it looks like. I hear there might be a demonstration. We can rope some people in. She founded social capoeira programs in Palestine and Syria, the Syrian refugee camps. Omar is a first generation born to immigrant parents from Bangladesh. She has a master's degree in Near and Middle Eastern Studies, speaks Arabic, Hindi, Bengali, as well as her native English. She is a keen sportswoman as well as playing capoeira She is a kickboxer, climber, and gym goer. So I was gonna ask her difficult questions, but now I changed my mind. Emma has been recognized for her humanitarian and development work by the Asian Women of Achievement Awards and Ubuntu Women's Awards. She is a guest lecturer on humanitarian and development issues and speaks on the wider issues surrounding young people, conflict and vital place and mental health, as well as being through sports. In these contexts. Bidna Capoeira's work is frequently covered in international media. So we're really glad to have Umar with us to tell us about Bidna Capoeira's work.
Thank you, Sid, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to... Thank you, Sid, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here amongst you today. And I'd firstly like to take the opportunity to thank the Muslim City Circle for inviting Bidna Capoeira here today, because I'm representing the organisation, and providing a community space for us to have these kinds of discussions and come together in a space like this. It's fantastic work, and I'm very sorry that Leila, the chairman, didn't join us today. For the talk today, I'll be talking about Bidna Capoeira, the charity, and what we do, where we want to see the charity going over the next few years, and I'll also show you a couple of short videos about the work. I thought Leila asked me to begin a little bit about how I ended up in the organisation. So to begin with, I'll start with a little bit about me. So I found myself in Syria in 2009. I'd been working for a few years as a researcher, and I was organising business conferences as well in the Gulf. So I was working in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi. I even went to Riyadh once for a business conference. And it seemed to me that my path on that road was going somewhere that was significantly unfulfilling. And alongside this, my parents had started to organise matches for me. And, it's a lovely young men, but it didn't really feel like the place I wanted to go or be at that time in my life. I'd previously studied Arabic on and off since my university days, and I was lucky enough to spend some time in Cairo at an Islamic school there, so I had quite a good basis for Arabic. And I thought it was a good time in my life to take a step back and perhaps continue with my studies. And I had friends who visited Syria, and they said the most wonderful things about the country, so I'm really sorry actually if people haven't had the opportunity to visit it because of the situation now, and they probably won't for a very long time, but it is an incredible place and with some fantastic history and heritage. And it felt like a safe decision at the time to go to Syria. So that's how I ended up in Syria. And whilst there, I came across these grassroots social capoeira projects, which were already happening with Iraqi and Palestinian refugees in a women's prison, amongst other projects. And it was in the women's prison that I actually started volunteering with the capoeira projects. So let's take a step back here and explain to you a little bit about capoeira for those of us who knows what capoeira is? I can't actually barely see the hands. There's very much enthusiasm, so I'm going to go with like maybe 34.7% of us know what it is. So capoeira is originally a Brazilian art form, and it was developed by slaves who were brought over to Brazil in the 16th century, and it was developed as a form of resistance to the oppression of slavery. And the song, so it's live singing, live instrumentals, it's cooperative play, so it's generally non-contact, though you do touch, it's not a contact sport. And it functions in circle form. So if you're in education or in mental health work, actually, it all its forms function as creating a community space, and it's an equal, a levelling device in terms of creating this community space. And there's something incredibly uplifting about having music and play and doing it together within your own community. And it was this sense of fun and joy of capoeira that was always present in the projects in Syria. So when we worked, I volunteered with also the Iraqi projects and the Palestinians, and there was always this incredible sense of energy and spirit whenever you were taking part in these projects. And it made a definitive contrast with the dirt, literally, and the backgrounds of the stories of the students themselves, who were refugees, and who were many times abused, and they faced both sexual violence and general violence, and it was consistent and endemic within those communities. Okay, so I think it's a good time to stop. And actually also take a look at what some of these projects look like. And the video that I'm about to show you is very short. Don't run away anywhere, I can see you. And it's the project that actually inspired a group of us to launch an international capoeira program, because we saw the impact it had in a sort of very definitive refugee situation. So let me take you to the video now.
احنا ما بنعرف احنا وين هسه، احنا هيك شوف هاي صحراء قاعدين لا شيء لا اكل ولا شرب ولا شيء.
Life in the camp is very basic. The people live in tents and they have the basic things for survival.
refugee camp itself was located in the no man's land between Iraq and Syria, and it held about 400 Palestinian Iraqi refugee families, and they were trapped there because Palestinians don't have IDs, they're not recognised as citizens in Iraq. So when the war came about, they were forced to flee, as many other Iraqis did, but nobody accepted them that easily. They don't have the paperwork. And actually, you're finding the same situation happening with Syria at the moment. These families were eventually placed in the US and Sweden after 4 years of being and living in this desert in tents. We're now working, I won't show you the next video, I'll show you the next, we're now working in Syria, and there's a lot of comparison between this project and the lives of the children that we work with now in the midst of the war in Syria. We're working in the north of Syria, in an area called Raqqa, and we also work in Damascus. And in the north, if you know about what's happening in Syria at the moment, I'm sure you do, there's a lot of different groups and different factions who control the country. And in the north, where we work, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant is in the ascendance. So this is quite a, how should we say, quite an extreme group in terms of how it's deploying its power in the region. One of our Syrian trainers, Ahmed, he actually fled to Raqqa last year. He's an internally displaced person, and we employed him to teach there. And he had been training with us in Syria. We trained him up, trained him up since 2007. Over the course of the last year in Raqqa, in Syria, schooling has been minimal, if it's happened at all. It's been heavily disrupted. There have been bread queues, which have lasted for 4 hours or more. Heating oil is scarce, and people are generally freezing, and food is expensive. The influx of foreign fighters has also meant that the local residents, they're having to put up with new laws. And over Ramadan last year, people were being arrested if they were seen eating on the streets. And Amr himself, who was teaching in the Capoeira programs, he felt himself personally that his security was being threatened under this new culture that was being created by these political groups, and he felt threatened in terms of deploying and working with these sports and music classes. And when travelling to teach in the classes, he would actually hide his instruments when travelling. We also lost one of our training venues because the owner was afraid that the fighters, of what they would do to him if they found out that he was renting out his venue to have these kinds of activities. On the other hand, the community was incredibly supportive of the Capoeira activities and the fact that they had a safe place for their children to go and to learn. And we were invited to take part in the Eid celebrations last year, organising community shows. And it's had a huge impact on the children that we work with. And I wanted to show you a short video of our work in Raqqa as well.
It's just a minute, 1:30 or something.
Okay, so while we wait for the video, just to say that the kind of people who attend our classes are children like Tamer. Her father was killed over the last couple of years in the war. Her mother's on her own raising 2 children, and to start with, just the behaviours that you start seeing displayed by these children, they're quite aggressive. They crave attention from the teachers. They find it really difficult to take instruction, and they find it really difficult to focus. They're all symptoms of trauma, and a lot of the students are displaying these behaviours. This is what our teachers have to cope with when the students come into our classes. trainer. So that was made over the summer last year, and these children are still, I sort of described some of the circumstances that these children are living through. We're also working in Palestine, and so I mentioned Syria here, but we're also working in Palestine, and we've recently started a project with Save the Children in East Jerusalem, also using capoeira programs. And I was surprised to learn that in East Jerusalem there's a very big hard drugs problem. But thinking about it, it makes sense. The communities that we're working with have become increasingly fractured. In Palestine, there's over 4 to 5 generations now of conflict. And young men especially, they feel that they have little in the way of a future. They are unemployed, they have few competitive skills, and the temptation is to go to Israel, where they can get menial jobs as cheap and illegal labour. They can make much more money. These young men would rather join criminal gangs where they can feel accepted, and they have a real sense of power and control as part of these gangs. And there's a lot of anger in people. But in the young, they have no real ways of expressing or dealing with this anger, and it blossoms in dangerous and increasingly self-harming ways. And when I was in Palestine in December, I got caught up in a riot in Ramallah, where there were just Palestinian young men running riot on the streets with sticks, and they were angry because somebody, a 14-year-old boy, had been shot in Jalazun refugee camps. One of the refugee camps just actually is on, if you don't know the geography of it, it's one of the biggest refugee camps near the main checkpoint between Israel and the West Bank. And these things will continue to happen. Peace is still most probably a very, very long way away, and it's difficult to have a solution now that will address the poverty and the ongoing oppression of the Palestinian peoples. Advocacy is of course one way, but that promises perhaps a longer term solution, and people need support now. Bidna Capoeira itself, we aim to provide a safe space for children who are going through the situation now, and in terms of our objectives, we're looking at basic skills such as coordination, cooperation, listening skills, taking instructions, things that we would all take for granted that our children and our young people could do. We also train up young people who can then become capoeira trainers themselves, such as in Syria, also in Palestine. And that helps us increase the skill sets that we're giving back to local communities, and also increasing the reach of our work. And from our perspective, these children and young people are victims of a conflict which, even if there's a solution that presents itself in a decade or two, it's going to be too late for them. They would have already missed out. So, from my initial time as a volunteer in a women's prison, and realising what a powerful impact sport, play and music can have on young people, and actually people understanding the control they can have over their own bodies and minds, I've been incredibly grateful over the last few years to have this opportunity and literally change lives through the organisation. I'm now a bureaucrat, and I do what I'm best at. I write, and I raise money for the organisation, and I advocate on behalf of it. And it's been a complete privilege to be a part of something that's providing so much hope. Because in the context that we work in, we see, the first thing that anybody ever wants to provide is you want to provide food, you want to provide water, you want to provide shelter. But at the end of the day, you also have to feed a person's spirit and give them a future to look forward to that's filled with possibility and not just a dead end. And as we mentioned, we're actually now setting up our new program in Jordan, and we'll be working in Al-Zakari refugee camp as well. I'd kind of like to wrap up here and ask if anybody wants to engage and have questions, because I can go on about the projects, but I've addressed over the course of this talk with a couple of videos, I've actually been looking at the political situation I touched on in Syria, in Palestine. I've been looking at how young people cope in those kinds of contexts, how war and conflict actually impacts people's behaviours, and I think it would be interesting if people have been listening to actually ask their own questions where you would like to delve into a little bit more about these places, because I think it's really difficult to understand what's going on without sort of being there. So I'd be happy to raise some discussions and questions. I've stopped exactly on half an hour.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, how do you help? How do you give the help and food and drink or in other services that you help them with?
We are what is known in the NGO terminology as a psychosocial organisation. So what the area that we work in is actually, the areas that we work in are actually more mental health, and that can be related to education. So we don't provide sort of the first fundamental tier of resources, which would be food, water and shelter, but we're looking at providing psychological health support so that people can deal with, often people will have mental health problems because of their situation, so they would have seen, you see people, everyone that we work with has seen people shot, killed, they see extreme amounts of violence, they've fled and lost their homes and family and friends, so they become depressed. And if you're depressed, it's very hard to want to do anything, let alone leave your tent. A lot of the time, women and girls will not be allowed out of the family space, so their education is more likely to be disrupted than a boy's. Boys will, because of the economic situation, they'll be more likely to be drawn into doing labour, sort of picking up bits of money here and there for odd jobs, which means their education also gets disrupted. So having a friendship group, having a space where you can actually be a child or a young person and look at how to deal with the situation that you find yourself in, and actually you're lost, you lose that ability. And capoeira is one way of addressing that.
So do they say anything? Do they express or just dance? I mean, you're saying it's a psychological support. Psychological support, is it just like a relaxation exercise, or you allow them to express their worries and what they went through?
Absolutely. So the way capoeira works is that it uses the circle form, and at the end of every class, people are able to discuss any issues that are relevant to them. We also use a counsellor who will come in and do discussions with the children at points through the classes. And also because of the space and trust that people develop, it's a way of actually accessing knowledge that you wouldn't otherwise have. So we become a first point of access in a way. So you can then address if children have, or people in your classes have issues, or you pick up on something, you can actually pass it on to other organisations who might have different services and facilities. A lot of the time in situations you realise that women, girls, young people, they don't know where to go to for services. So it's a way of passing on information that gets into the community itself.
Okay, what are the meanings of the words of the song?
I don't speak Portuguese, but they're different songs. So there's some of the songs would address, a lot of the songs are about empowerment. So in terms of looking at, so if you think they came from the origination of slavery, so a lot of them are sort of looking at how people at the time would see sort of the slave owner approaching and to hide, things like going to market to do your shopping, things around the place of women. Does anybody else who plays capoeira would like to explain some of the song lyrics?
I can do it, I'm quite good at this. For example, there are songs, Tem Den De, for example. It's a song, everybody have a group, we sit in a circle, everybody's clapping, and then somebody's saying, oh, Tem Den De, Syria, Tem Den De, and then everybody's saying, Tem Den De, Capoeira, Tem Den De. So we're mixing a lot also what happened in the situation, so you can use Arabic, we sing as well in Arabic.
What does Tem Den De mean?
Tem Den De means like, Tem is like I have, Den De is a Brazilian nut, it's a palm oil, use it for cooking. Yeah, it gives the food flavor. It's a bit like chili. Yeah, so it means the song. This is what we explain as well. It means like if you have then de, it means you have flavor. If you play and you participate, it's a nice game. It has flavor. And then I would say, oh, umultem then de, and she has flavor. And if you sing this song, you explain about participation. You can use those capoeira songs. They're also about violence, about gender, about actually discussing topics nobody want to talk about. You don't go in a community or you don't go in a refugee camp and say like, you know, there's a problem here, I want to speak about gender violence, or I want to speak about whatever. People just don't want to talk about it because it's a boring topic. But the kids, because they're learning those songs, they learn them in Portuguese, they learn them in Arabic as well, and we have translation, they get homework and so on, so they're coming back, and then you can actually discuss those topics, and this is very important as well. So and this is also where Umul said, the psychosocial counselor also has the role, because you have to lead those discussions, and so that they open up in this safe space with friends. Capoeira is a bit like a family. If we always meet here at the same time, imagine we coming in always together, so we know each other. Somebody's cooking, so you create this safe space where people find the trust, and so then you bring it to another level.
If I ask the ladies' question slightly differently, is to what extent are these lyrics sort of appropriate for the Muslim Arab community? So I can be a bit more direct, because actually, like to what extent? I mean, and I think that's what we're trying to get to, right? Like, are these lyrics appropriate for the community that we are talking about here? Are they, you know, you walk around the Middle East or any other place and you see kids, you know, singing, I mean, I spend a lot of time in France and people singing all these songs in English, and they're like, really, whatever you're singing that in front of your daughter? And he's like, what does that mean? Like, you know, I'm not going to explain, but that's something that the question.
In terms of the songs that we use, we also provide translations, and we also tend to select songs that would make sense for the cultural situation we're working in. One of the things that we have noticed that young people will do is they will have, you know, the ones in Palestine, for instance, in Syria, they have access to the internet. So then they will actually start going away and researching for themselves. So it opens the door to learning, whether they can choose to what degree or to what point they want to learn a bit more. And also we very much try to localise our projects, so we're asking trainers on the ground to research the songs, because you have a plethora of songs, you can choose lots, but so the trainers on the ground will be the ones who actually select and then translate and then choose which ones to teach. Because you don't want to have a model where you come in from outside and you say, it has to be something that people accept, otherwise it just won't work.
Can I ask you, so I'll take it back to the early stuff there, why capoeira? Why not, you know, people have done football, people have done all sorts of other activities, right? Why capoeira in particular? Not because of right now you guys love it, but why is it this activity that has this effect, or why is it the appropriate activity to achieve the aim that you had in mind?
I don't know if you noticed, but at the beginning of my talk, when I was talking about what capoeira is, I actually described it initially as an art form. And I think that is the key, because capoeira combines live music, sports, it can be many, many different things, and it's uniquely non-competitive. And in a situation where you have young people who have a lot of anger, aggression and frustration, and they generally start picking up behaviours, like they can't really communicate very well, it's difficult to work with, essentially use music. This is a different debate, but music has a way of reaching out to children and young people who have experienced something they just can't talk about. It has a way of just opening them up and making them join in. So you'll find children who, you know, they won't do anything, they won't join an activity, they won't speak to you. But you start sort of clapping and you have some music and people are singing, and they'll start coming closer to the group. And the way capoeira also works is you have a lead singer, so you might be sort of setting out the first line of the song, and then everybody is expected to join in the chorus, which is very, very simple, so we can all do it, and people can clap, and children start joining in. It's also, because of the way it's non-competitive and you cannot win and you cannot lose, it also enables, for instance, parents to be part of that group. So we've had we have classes where children are obviously brought to the class by the community, parents, they show up, and they'll just stand and join the circle, they'll do a little bit of singing, they'll clap, but then they're part of the group. And I think that those facets that you can actually use different aspects of it, make it unique in the circumstances that we work within.
Exactly. Thank you.
After you do the groups, the small groups, the children will be by themselves and the adults by themselves, or everybody will be talking?
It depends on the classes. So some of the classes we will, it's just the children, they come in as part of a school activity. When the class is finished, for younger children, you find that parents are coming to pick up their children, and so if they're there, then they can join into the circle at the end. We encourage, through all of our classes, apart from the ones in the school, for obvious reasons, we encourage parents and community people to come in and volunteer and be a part of these sessions, because the other aspect of it is, the Middle East doesn't really have a very strong sporting ethos. It doesn't have a culture of sport and activity. And I don't know how many of you know this, but Palestinians are actually, in terms of diabetes, it's heavily on the rise. So things like these kinds of diseases are coming about. And one of the ways you can address dietary issues, health issues, and give people knowledge and understanding is actually through having these kinds of groups and activities taking place, and teach children how to eat better. They all eat sweets. They come into classes with their sweets, and everybody smokes, and it's a culture. You have to find ways to sort of slightly change it.
Do you have any other questions in the audience?
Thanks very much for a very illuminating talk. I was just wondering, obviously a lot of these children are traumatised. Do you have any medical input into this as part of a holistic approach to their problems?
So let's step back with the clinical definition of trauma is a little bit more than our activities take on. So if you're diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, then you should go forward and have definite psychiatric or medical treatment. And unfortunately, in a lot of these situations, you get people who display different levels of trauma. And in terms of what we try to do is, you don't have, so if you have to go back, and I think this is really good what Sid was talking about, Al-Zatari refugee camp and the examples of people's there. People don't have access to services in general. They're queuing for food, they barely have somewhere to live, and it's overcrowded if they do, and services are minimal. So no one is going to, there won't be a service where you can have one-to-one therapy. It's not going to happen. In terms of we don't provide treatment as such. We provide a space where people can actually start looking or dealing with the experience that they are currently going through, and make friendships, have a different network, find space to also access other resources. And part of the issue that we find with the children that we work with as well, they start imbibing the violence that's around them. So it becomes normal to now in Syria be part of one faction or another. And if you think 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 9-year-olds, they want to be the guy at the checkpoint now. And they're talking about, the Alawis and the Sunnis, and what are the Druze, and that's part of their mentality. And if that becomes normalised, you think in a few years' time, they will be the next generation of soldiers. And that's what they think is normal. And these spaces are about creating different ways of thinking, different ways of being, and just giving a space to kind of say, this is not it. There is something more out there for you. And here's a door that you can take to open. Does that answer your question? Slightly.
It does, thanks very much.
You can catch me again.
Did you want to ask? Did you want to carry on, Zoe? Because we have time, and then I come back to the lady. It's not the trauma you deal with, so that is a servant.
I'm coming from a medical background, which is why I asked that question.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking is that the longer you leave someone exposed to a particular form of abuse, trauma, be it physical or psychological, if the quicker the response, the less likely you are to develop it as a long-term problem, which is why I was just wondering, because you're doing a sterling job with the stuff that you're doing, and I'm just wondering whether there's a little gap there where a psychiatrist or a child psychologist could then step in and act as a rate-determining step in preventing that deterioration for them wanting to become a part of this faction.
Well, so in terms of your question, what we can do, so we we try to set up referral systems. So one of the things, so we're a first point of contact for children, so we might identify, but we would identify that these children, specific children has particular behaviours that are very traumatised, actually needs further help. We can pass that on, and we have a counsellor working with us, but we are not a one-to-one sort of therapy organisation. We literally would not have the resource to take, we work with hundreds of children to take one out and give that therapy. What we can do is go back to the community and say it's an issue, but then you find a wider economic and politicised problem, because a lot of the time these communities, they just literally don't have the resources to provide that kind of help. So you can go to UN organisations, develop partnerships with MSF to try and say, okay, can we pass these actually more difficult and vulnerable children onto your services? But to be honest, that will not always happen, and it will be a difficult one. I would never say we do that, because a lot of the time the structures just simply don't exist to enable us. You get people will fall through the net, and it's almost inevitable the path they will end up on, because there's no one's picked them up.
And they've already all fallen through the net, to catch some ones there. We'll take the question from the lady here.
I don't want to make a question, I just want to say what was, because I'm a child psychologist, the most impressive thing about the videos is how the children themselves are able to say how helpful it is. And in war and in any terribly traumatic situation, the reason the children suffer more is the children don't have words to attach to these terrible experiences. And the fact that they are so articulate, some of them, shows how powerful that medium is. And I know as a psychologist that it's exactly right when they tell you it's exactly right. And they're saying it's helpful in every possible way.
We found in Syria, with the projects that we're running now, especially that there's been a real desire to have the programs, or they create a relationship with a teacher, so you have this safe person as well to have the relationship with. What's really difficult for us is that the other side of the coin is that you should have these programs ongoing. You should be able to give them sustainable stability to say we can run it, and we can't offer that. Not because we don't want to be there, but because of the security situation. So you're always, you're making a moral judgment in a way, and sort of making the call to say this is better than nothing, which may not be right, may not be wrong, but this is the position that we stand at. So I think the concept of do no harm, it's a very difficult one to judge on. I think I'll leave others to judge me on it.
But I think what's really important is that children don't feel the need to impress you. They don't feel the need to say the right thing. The way they're speaking is absolutely from the heart. And I can see it's like they were so thirsty, about to die, and then this water came and filled them up with life. And therapy is not to cure a condition. Therapy is to give you hope for the future. Yeah. And I can see that made a huge difference to them. So it's extremely well done to you guys.
Thank you. That was actually the feedback that we got through. And running these kinds of projects is heartbreaking. It's really difficult, and it's actually those stories that we hear from the children that keep inspiring us to keep working on this program, because it is by no means easy.
Do we have any other questions there?
So I think it's really good work. Do you see this extending any further, the program extending any further, like replacement education for girls or anything of that sort?
So in terms of what we're doing, we've already expanded far beyond what we thought we would, I think, in a way. So we started up in Syria, we're now in Palestine, and we're starting our office in Jordan. We want to consolidate some of the work that we're doing, because one of the major learnings that we've found is when you work in contexts like that, there is so much that is constantly going on. Somebody is going to be bombed or shot. There's so much violence and unknowns happening, demonstrations, that you cannot plan as you would in a physical context where it allows you to do things. There's a constant sense of unknown. In terms of developing our work, we are looking at using the international capoeira community a lot more, and innovating actually more of an online space where people can share resources and what their experiences. And we already coordinate with capoeira organisations of people who are involved in this kind of social work in their own local projects, from Brazil to Australia to Japan, And I recently had an offer of starting a project in Dhaka in Bangladesh, which, given how busy we are, I had to turn down, but it also shows you that there is there's significant need in the international community and significant awareness that there are a lot of young people out there who are distressed, and we are trying to reach them and we can't. And if you can find a different or novel way of doing so, then people want to do that. There's a lot of hope for young people, but to reach them seems to be very difficult.
Please go ahead.
Are you thinking to make it like to go to other countries apart from the countries that you said, or are these the only countries that you are working with? For example, are you going to go towards, for example, like Iraq, where there are children without, family without parents who died in the past?
Currently, we're focusing on working in the Levant. So we will start our regional office in Jordan, which will then focus on supporting the programs in Syria and in Palestine. Over the next 3 to 5 years, we intend to also expand to Lebanon and to Gaza. And after that, or during this period, we will see. The long-term vision is to work internationally, but to have people who have skills on the ground, so local people who've been trained up to take those learnings and capoeira skills into their own communities, and for us to be sort of more administrative support base for that. But that's what we're working towards. Our vision is international, but we also realise now that we have to remain focused and create a solid and strong base.
Any other questions? Can I ask you a tough question, although the lady had answered it earlier, but in a different way? So a lot of people would argue in these situations, there's a difficulty is sort of one of allocating the resources, right? So you tell us, on one hand, people are queuing for 4 hours to get bread, and some people might argue, shouldn't the resources that are going into a program, like say a play program, go into giving people bread?
Okay, so I think you're asking a wider question about how the international donor community works, so how international organisations actually function, and then also asking a question about how do we allocate resources. I think it's very much firstly an individual decision, so if any of us, I hope many of us do zakat and give to charity, how we choose to designate those resources. And I think people are...
I think in a way I'm asking the question of how have you convinced, UNICEF, as one of your funders, right? So how do I convince UNICEF that it's better to give 50 grand for capoeira than to give for nappies and food, for instance? Not that they're not doing that. I think that's sort of I appreciate you have an argument that obviously has worked in the past. What I'm trying to get to is often, what you're battling against is, there are, at any point, any funder has numerous requests, right? They have all of these priorities. There are people who need bread, and there are people who need medical care, and those, if you think about, are, some people would argue that they're much more essential than maybe, I don't know, you're going to say mental well-being, so I would say they would argue that that's more important than mental well-being. Is that the case, and why is it not? Why is it important to still support such issues?
Okay, I would first like to point out that you sort of undermined me in my very clever response about how people have to give money, but in terms of...
That's what the chair does. I grabbed on that.
I was feeling very intelligent at the moment there.
You sit on.
In terms of, one of the things, so if we take your example of South refugee camp, you give people food, bread, water, and then you've got a mass of people now in this place. What are they doing? What do? They have no money, they have no jobs, so what are they doing in that time? So the donor is looking at the situation laterally, because obviously you've got the stress of making sure people eat first, and they're thinking expletive, but all the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, they're getting together, hanging out and trying to sort of steal stuff. They're getting out of the camp, a lot of prostitution, selling, you've got gold people coming in, buying women. You have people trying to be very enterprising and set up black market businesses, which may not be very positive in nature. You've got people getting depressed because they have nothing to do. There's no hope. There's a stillness inside people because they've seen, they've come out of a war, they've probably travelled for days to get to this camp, and they're tired, and then suddenly there's nothing. There's nothing to do apart from join the queues for your food. And I think donors are looking at these situations and saying, we've got to now make sure that there are schools for the children, but then the children don't want to go to the schools. So then you provide, and then we can come in and say, actually, we can provide an activity which will help take care of that energy that people have and provide a positive space and an attractive space for children and young people to want to go towards. So it's actually not that difficult in a way to say to a donor, okay, fine, you've given them the grant, but what else?
I think I've supported the argument, not really defined it. I haven't actually defined it. But I think because even the individuals face that challenge, right? As an individual, if I have a certain amount of money, there's, I get 20 emails a day saying, give me money. I still have the same debate in my head because on one hand, I do have people who are in Turkey saying, we need some books for the kids. And on the other hand, I have people who are saying, well, we have operations and we need, medical supplies and so forth. So I think that debate always exists, not only just for UNICEF, which is going to spend billions, but also for you and I, if I have to divide 100 quid between a number of charities, how do I? So I think that's the reason I asked that question. That's the job of the chair, is to sometimes ask the difficult questions that people might be thinking.
I think you need to have a complete different session on philanthropy and how it should work.
Possibly, yeah. There are also, we have a lot of people here who have argued about that in different ways. Any other questions from the audience? Please, and I think we'll have a couple more and then we will say talk to.
First of all, fantastic, really good piece of work you're doing is amazing. Just one thing, you mentioned about funding, obviously UNICEF funding for what you're doing. So that's the money element of it to keep you going and help those children. The second, the resources and people who would come and volunteer for you. What approach do you take to get more and more people helping you in the process? Because you mentioned about resource challenges. One is money, the other is time of people. How do you manage that? Or how do you recruit people?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. In terms of how the NGO charity sector actually works with organisations like ours, we are funded for part of our work, but not for all of it, to get the money problem coming in. So there's a constant battle to get people to give us more funds to do our work. And frankly, there's never enough. You're always partly relying on volunteer support. In terms of getting volunteers to want to help us, people wanting to give their energy and time and resources has never been an issue. What has been an issue is getting people who have the relevant resources to give. And this has been a mixed bag for us. So, for instance, we want to have capoeira teachers come out for a little bit to give extra training to our students who will be training themselves to be capoeira teachers. But these people have full-time jobs, they have bills to pay, so then you need to pay them to come out, they just don't have the resource. And capoeira teachers don't earn that much. So they're not the kind of person who can say, right, I'm going to take 6 months out of my life and go do good somewhere else. So generally what we've found is people will give part of their resources, and we've been very lucky. We actually built up as a volunteer organisation, and it's now that we're functionally starting to look at ourselves in terms of actually a business entity through a charity ethos, but structurally we have to look at ourselves and say, okay, how can we make this organisation viable so that it will sustain over the longer term? And that's a whole different conversation, because then I have to talk about more marketing, sustainability, critical path analysis, which I really don't want to do right now. But there's an amazing amount of energy to work with charities actually. People really, really do want to help, and that spirit of just giving you that support and saying, we believe in you, and it's fantastic. It gives a lot to people who work in the charity, because it's a really difficult, there's difficult places to work. And they break your heart every day, what you see in here.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Please, go ahead. I'm going to close with you. You get the last one, go on.
Okay, so in Syria, we have 6 or 7 in Raqqa and Damascus, and they're all local people, and they're working with around 350 children between Raqqa and Syria. And in Palestine, we have an office of 7 people, And they're working with how many people at the moment, Tariq?
Same.
Around 350 people as well. We're working, so it's good. And we have somebody based in Lebanon as well who I forget about, so one person in Lebanon.
And how big are the classes, maybe?
In the classes, we make them between around 25 students. Usually you get anywhere from 15 to 40. But we've also found that when you run an initial workshop, you have an open workshop so people can come, but as you start having regular classes, you need to limit the people so you can actually focus on your students.
There you go. So it's not very far from your school. Before I thank you all and close, just a few reminders, and you'll have time to sort of talk one-to-one. So for the next couple of weeks, inshallah, there will be now City Circle talks, but keep your eyes on the website and the email list and you will get the updates. The second thing is the City Circle is always looking for people to help out. I think it's particularly an email went out on Monday asking if somebody would like to join as an intern. You might not, if it's not you, some of your younger brothers and sisters or university who would like to get a bit into, the community action. Having spent quite a number of years doing some of this stuff, it's, you learn a lot, and I think it's been a very valuable experience for all the people that I know that have done it. So I would definitely encourage you to ask other people and suggest it to them. And then thirdly, you can always give money. There's a red box at the back if you would like to support the work of City Circle. I'm sure some of you will be interested in also supporting them all, which is, I think their work is much more incredible than anything that we do. Because it's, I think just people tell me the stories of what happens in these refugee camps, and I just can't imagine. I just read them, and I just can't. You just can't picture the lives of both the adults and the kids. And if somebody helps rebuild those lives, then if they're not rewarded financially in this life, then certainly God inshallah will reward them in the hereafter. With that, I would like to thank all for joining us. Thank you.